I'd like to welcome you all to Money Talks, the State of Global Film Finance. Very pleased to have Peter Trin, Bertrand Fevre, Jonathan Dechter, Mohammed Hefsi, and Matthew Rhodes will be moderating. Please give them a warm welcome.
Welcome, everybody, and really happy to have this great group of panelists up here, too, who all come from different backgrounds and different perspectives. And today we're going to talk about the state of the global film finance. And I kind of want to set the table for a minute and just talk about really a lot of changes that have happened over the past decade. I think a great place to start is about 10 years ago, the studios started to make fewer movies, like half as many movies. And they started to really step into, I'd say, world creation, big $150, $200 million movies, really focusing on marketing, distribution, merchandising. And with that, a lot happened in the independent space because it gave a lot of room for independents to start making movies where studios decided they wanted to distribute them but not make them. So that was a really great opening for independent filmmakers out there around the world to make movies and to seek distribution. And with that opening, simultaneously, writers started having issues really finding work because the studios were making fewer movies, spec scripts weren't selling at the time, and so writers started moving to television. And so there was as far as fresh content goes, as far as fresh script and fresh ideas, they were harder to find, harder to seek. And as they moved into TV, there was that massive paradigm shift that took place as digital platforms started to explode. And all these great filmmakers started working more in television, started working more in series. And so what was interesting is that as the digital platforms exploded in terms of acquisitions, but then they started making movies, as we all know. And so the filmmakers, writers, directors, producers started to really shift in the marketplace. And today, partly what we're going to discuss is the disruption that digital platforms have created in the industry on a global level at this point. And I think, moreover, to discuss the different backgrounds that everybody has up here and how that's impacted financing movies, what that means for them in making movies, and whether they're still sticking with the tried and true models of how movies have been financed over all of the years, or how movies can be financed now and then moving forward in the future. And so what I'd love to do is have everybody talk a little bit about who you are, where you work and what you do, so everyone can get your perspective on things. If we could start at the end with Jonathan Dechter.
Hi, guys. First of all, thank you for having us here. I think we're all happy to be here in this wonderful city. My name is Jonathan Dechter. I'm the president and COO of a company called Voltage Pictures. We finance and produce independent American and European independent films. We bring about 15 to 20 films per year to the market. Some of the films the company has done are The Hurt Locker, Dallas Buyers Club, Wind River this year, All Eyes on Me, the Tupac Shakur biopic. So we have a pretty wide variety of films that we do, and we are in the thick of the film finance business because that's what we do, and we act as financiers, producers, and sales agents. So we look forward to sharing some information with you.
And Mohammed?
Hi, so Mohammed Hefsi. I'm a producer, scriptwriter from Egypt. Spent the first, I would say, 7-8 years of my career just writing Egyptian films, and then ended up starting Film Clinic, which started as a development company, mainly it's like a pipeline to develop scripts, working with a network of different writers, also training a lot of writers in Egypt, and then actually started producing in 2007, mostly local Egyptian films. I've also co-produced with Arab countries, with the UK, with the US, with France, Germany. And yeah, so I mean, I guess my experience is a little bit different than these guys because I work mostly with small local films, and as we all know, the film financing stage for Arab films is extremely difficult, and so I'm looking forward to this discussion.
And Peter Trin.
Good afternoon. How's everyone? I'm Peter Trin. I'm Managing Director of the International and Independent Film Group at ICM Partners. ICM Partners is one of the world's largest talent and literary agencies. The International Independent Film Group primarily does three things. So just, being like on top of just being, the traditional duties of an agent, there's three things that we primarily look at in the global landscape. So we help to package creative elements to content. We help to structure the financing behind content. And on top of that, we also help to negotiate and secure the distribution, whether it be North American or worldwide deals. So look forward to getting to know all you guys and answering questions about what's going on with the business.
And
Hi.
Bertrand, favor.
Good afternoon. I'm, I guess, the only European from this panel, just a different model. I started in France because I'm French, and I've been producing in France for 25 years and established a company in the UK, which from a British perspective sounds like madness. And I've been having a UK company for the last 17 years too. So we've been producing independent movies, starting with writer-directors like Lynn Ramsey or Asif Kapadia, who made Amy recently, until recent films like 45 Years or Le Weekend. As well as French films. After like 10 years of independent production only, I've started developing a library of films, first selling to French TV, up to the point that I've now handled like 1,000 films, and recently for international. So we have a library of 600 films for international, and we sell our own productions and co-productions. We don't sell other people's new films, but we sell our own films.
Let's start with the impact that digital platforms have had on the industry of late, and just really start there and talk about what the pros and cons are. And starting with you, Bertrand, you are an award-winning producer. You work with some of the most wonderful filmmakers you've broken and have worked with in your career. And working both in France and the UK, and really getting to see Western Europe and the way that movies are made, how has the digital uprising and this giant paradigm shift impacted you, your filmmakers, and the pros and cons of that?
Okay. I think as the controversy in Cannes this year evidenced it, the business model of large companies like Amazon or Netflix is kind of disruptive from a European perspective, and I guess it's a different angle when you talk about British or American cinema. They're disruptive because most of our financing and the ability we have to do films as producers is based on pre-acquisition, hence predetermination of a circuit the film will go through when finished. So you have pre-acquisition of a theatrical distributor, and then a pay TV window, and then a free TV, and then some equity investors. If you have a company like Amazon or Netflix saying, you might not go theatrical when your movie is finished, and suddenly all of the financing, the traditional financing collapses. So we have had to try and create a third way where you have TV movies, you have theatrical movies, and e-movies. But so far, e-movies has not proven yet to be a proper third market. And I think it will change over time. They will know better how to market their own movies without necessarily needing to go to Cannes or stuff like that. And we also will know how to produce for this third way.
Peter, you working at one of the leading talent agencies in the world and doing independent film financing. How has this impacted you, your clients, the financiers that you represent and work with, the digital platforms, the disruption that's being created right now, in both a positive and a negative sense? Because I know both have impacted the fact that you have clients across so many different facets of both the creative and the business side.
So, I mean, the biggest thing that technology's done is, innovate, right? It's innovated how consumers watch content. Like, for example, how many of you actually watch content through streaming? Raise your hand. And 10 years ago, you probably didn't even know what streaming was, right? So the reality is like how, you know, if you look at the trends on like, you know, if you were analyzing how VHS changed the marketplace, how DVDs changed the marketplace, and how SVOD specifically, how streaming and technology has changed the marketplace, you have to look at it from the angle of how consumers are consuming content today. So it's about innovation. And then, so the way we viewed it, and, you know, at ICM, for example, we are like the agency that was, you know, heavily involved behind some of the first big deals in this landscape. So, you know, I know that, you know, we did some of the first couple worldwide SVOD deals. I know that, you know, we're the company, you know, that negotiated the first Amazon Originals movie, and then we've gone on to, like, you know, do movies over there with, you know, clients like Woody Allen or Jim Jarmusch, right? So the reality is, our perspective on it is, there's a lot of innovation happening, and with innovation there's a lot of competition, a lot of business to be had. So we've been looking at those opportunities and looking at other digital companies that are going to enter the landscape of distribution to see how they complement traditional previous models, and how distribution is going to go forth, whether it be from a North American or worldwide perspective. So in a lot of ways, you know, we look at it as, you know, positive changes in the business. So.
Great, thank you. And you know, Mohammed, as a writer and a producer, you're worldly in that you do movies that are in Egypt, in the US, in the UK, in the Arab world as well. How's this impacted you as a content creator, as a writer, and as a producer, solely as an artist and a filmmaker?
Okay, well, concerning the Arab films, I don't really know yet of any Netflix or Amazon originals that have gone off the ground. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think definitely it's something that is going to come. It's definitely starting. I'm starting to feel it happen more on television, also in the region. But for films, so far the only real impact has been, you know, a new window, the SVOD window, which is now. You can actually find some decent money in SVOD window if you are selling to someone like Netflix. Although the problem with the region is that the way the industry is structured here, a lot of the films make their money from television in the Arab world, and especially the pay TV window. So the problem then becomes the exclusivity factor and having to have a holdback on television rights. And so if you end up having to make a choice between getting that money from the SVOD window or losing the TV money, then it becomes a really difficult choice, especially if your film can generate a decent revenue from TV sales. So I remember being in a situation where for example, I was negotiating the SVOD rights for one of the films I did last year called Clash, which was the opening film of Certains Regardent in Cannes, 2016, and to sell the SVOD window, I would have had to lose more than $500,000 of revenue from TV, so it was just impossible. And I said that until that exclusivity issue is solved, because these VOD platforms, they rely on the fact that this film exists only on their platform. So until that is solved, and I think the fact that sometimes when you get into originals, you can't even show the film in cinemas. I think that's going to be something that is going to hinder a lot of filmmakers from wanting to, wanting to work that way. Because although you get seen by quite a lot of people, but the experience of being in a cinema and watching your film with, hundreds of people, I think that's something that it's a bit of a compromise as far as I'm concerned. So yes, there are positive sides to take from it, but I think it's also a period of transition, and I think that in this region it hasn't happened yet. So it's slowly shaping up, and I think that it definitely will impact. It's just, I hope it does so in a way that is beneficial for the producers and the filmmakers and the VOD platforms jointly. Yeah.
Well, Mohammed, speaking of the Middle East, is it, and I just looking around the room, and I think this is probably relevant to a lot of folks, is it more a question of exclusivity, or is it that the SVOD platforms don't have the subscriber base to make the revenue equal what it would doing it through television? So is it a platform issue, or is it a subscriber issue?
I think It's both. I mean, when you talk about the Arab platforms, for example, they're all in their infancy. So you hear every day of a new platform that is coming up, and obviously, there are very few subscribers, and the money is just so difficult to monetize at this moment. But if we talk about Amazon or Netflix, who are the big players in the region or in the world, then I think they have the subscribers. It's just it's a matter of exclusivity because they want that film to only be on Netflix, and which is understandable if you're paying for it. That makes sense. But for SVOD, if you're just getting the SVOD license, then having to have that holdback on TV, for us in the region, it's quite a problem because we really do rely a lot on TV for in our business plans. So yeah.
Let's ask Jonathan the same question about digital platforms for a minute. So, as a company that makes some incredible films, wins Oscars, finances movies, but also sells their own movies. It's rare. And so I'm curious how the digital platforms, the pros and cons of how it's impacted you as a company, the movies you make and the movies you sell.
Sure. There's been a ton of positive impact and there's been some negative impact. So on a 30,000-foot level, there's 2, 3, 4 new customers. And these are really big customers. These are customers with all the money in the world that can say yes, and right away your movie is sold. So when we are looking at financing a movie, and let's use a movie from my company's past, The Hurt Locker, for example. That was a $12 million movie that in today's world, if Netflix really wanted that movie, they would have said, okay, we'll give you 18, 19, take the movie for 20 years and go on and have a nice life. Sounds like a really good deal, doesn't it? You show up, you make a movie, you're done. You make $6 million, give or take. That would have been the worst deal in the history of the company if we would have done it. The Hurt Locker, through independent distributors, has spun a pretty big multiple on that 6 number over the last 15 years. So in one respect, you're in and you're out, and you get a quick profit, and you can sort of hit and run. But on a film that works, and movies that go to these digital platforms, or movies that go to Netflix, are never given the opportunity to flourish in cinemas and exist in other mediums. Movies that go to Amazon, a movie like Manchester by the Sea last year, that was able to have its cake and eat it too. That had a proper theatrical release. That movie will make money for the rest of time for the investors. So that is the ultimate of the wins. The bad or the negative side of these digital platforms is, I'm not sure whether it was digital that killed DVD or it was DVD that just died. DVD used to be 30 to 50% of a film's revenue on a global basis. That's basically disappeared and been replaced with the SVOD window, which is much more in line with pay TV, which is more of 10 to 15% for just that SVOD window. So you've given up a whole heck of a lot. You've saved some money in costs because it doesn't cost you anything to deliver Netflix a movie compared to a DVD, which used to cost $1.50 to $2 to pick, pack, ship, and get it from the warehouse to the consumer. There's also less people in the middle. I don't need anybody to go to Netflix. I can call Netflix myself rather than when you were licensing content previously and your local distributor. You had your local distributor who had to go deal with Walmart, who had to then go deal with someone in the middle because they had a vendor ID number to Walmart, so you were 4 steps away from the money. In this case, we're next to the money, so that evens out a bit.
When you talk about, look, in the early 2000s, tax credits came about too. And so that was really helpful with the DVD market falling apart and home video and the tax credits coming in as well. All the different ways of financing movies in the independent marketplace, from doing European co-productions, accessing soft dollars around the world, pre-selling movies internationally. Now you have the addition of these digital platforms that are acquiring certain windows that's helping finance movies and television. You know, in many respects, some people say that that's a great addition to helping movies and content get made. It's also saw an explosion in television and in series. And so one of the questions I want to talk about is when you look at what you call the tried and true three-legged stool model, which is foreign sales, tax credits, and equity. And you know, some people say that the international marketplace in terms of pre-sales is really falling apart and being really challenging, which means you need a lot more equity to make up for the inability to pre-sell movies. And so I'm curious from your perspectives as we go around the room, and I'll start, Mohammed, with you as a producer. Are you finding the old tried and true independent model of foreign sales, tax credits, and equity, and co-production money, of course, and soft dollars, to be more challenging today than it's been in the past? And what are you doing to overcome that problem?
Well, over here, there's only, I think, 1 or 2 countries that offer some kind of tax credit or production rebate. So that is hardly, we hardly rely on that for financing our films if we're shooting in the Middle East. But equity is, I mean, yes, it's always been equity here because there's very little government support, very few funds available for, you know, for Arab films. And pre-sales are hardly existent, except for, you know, the big blockbuster Egyptian films that have stars, etc. So yeah, it's always really just, you know, independently financed films, you know, from friends and family of the filmmakers, from small companies that put together the financing. And the budgets, we're talking about budgets of usually under $1 million, so it's, or sometimes even under $500,000, so it's, yeah, I mean, it's still challenging. You know, sometimes I think it's easier to finance a $100 million film than it is to finance a, you know, one that is less than $1 million. So, yeah, so I don't really know if I've answered your question.
No, you did, and in part I'm going to take that a little bit further and talk to you, Peter. Really, I would say, being the managing director of International Independent Film for ICM, you have clients that are financiers, clients that are filmmakers. You know, so, you know, one of the big questions I have for you is how are you overcoming the hurdles of, as people say, foreign sales are falling apart again, but there's tax credits, and how are you dealing with that in today's marketplace to get all the movies put together every year that you do?
Well, so I was just going to backtrack real quick and just, does everyone understand how a traditional film globally gets put together? Raise your hand if you guys understand, like, all the vocabulary. All right, I'm going to give you like a quick 10-second like explanation. You're going to be experts in it. Just don't take my job after this. Good deal? All right, cool. All right. So the different layers of investing in global film are, you know, as Matthew just said, like, you know, there's pre-sales, right? And so in real estate, for example, when I go out and get a loan on a house or a piece of land, the collateral is the land or the house, right? In film, the collateral when you go out and get a loan is the unsold value of the film or the package, right? So you go out and you have like companies like Jonathan go out and give you like sort of like a quote sheet, a sale, like an estimate sheet on what he thinks or his team thinks that are the values of that film in specific territories all around the world. It's like a little Excel sheet. You use Excel, right? And it just shows you like, hey, here's what I would ask, here's what we would ultimately take, and here, then you take the aggregate, and that's the value of the film, like before you even go out to market, right? And so when he actually executes a sale on that film for a specific territory, before the film is completed, it's called a pre-sale, right? So that specific distributor in that territory takes the film, takes the rights for the film and pre-buys it. Even so, the distributor doing that, you still have to get that piece of paper, that contract financed. So you go to these banks or private individuals around the world that are seasoned at this kind of like financial transaction, and they pay you an upfront, you know, advance against like what the contract is. And on top of that, they add something that's called a gap loan. A gap loan is a loan against the unsold rights. So in your traditional model, you have pre-sales, right? And then you have your loan, your gap loan. And gap is based on, the banks look at the estimates and say like, okay, we're looking at our risk profile and we're a bank and we just want to lend to make fees. So we're going to lend you this much at this rate. So you go out and you shop it, and like you get the best deal. And then there's production incentives. Production incentives are essentially also called soft money. And at the end of the day, the way I look at it, when I look at it, from a financier standpoint, I look at them as production necessities. Because the reality is, at the end of the day, shooting in that part of the world or doing that certain co-production with those countries gets money that I don't have to pay back is like a pretty great deal, right? Or if I need to shoot like in Georgia, for example, and I'll get the net effect 20% back on the budget and reducing the risk profile for my client, the financier, that's a good deal, right? So it's known as soft money or production incentives, right? So that's the third part. The last segment of it is really equity. Equity is like the riskiest part of a film investment. It's usually a private individual or a financier like Matthew and Matthew's company, and they go out and they buy and they finance and they take the equity position, which is usually the last position in the waterfall when you're recouping money, right? But what they are buying is like ownership in the film. They're buying back in the film. They're becoming producers. They're investing in the film. So when Matthew goes in and he looks at like a film and he says, hey, I got to look at the risk profile and see like all these things, like how far am I down the waterfall, et cetera, like how much production incentives is like mitigating my risk profile. He sits and looks at it from that perspective and he goes, okay, we're willing to finance this film based on analyzing our internal model. Like we're looking at financing this film at this budget because that's the risk profile we want to take on the movie. So essentially that's how a film gets broken down.
Independent film financing.
I mean, did I miss anything? Or you?
Well, or there's just a rich guy who writes a check.
Yeah.
Or girl, we call them patrons of the
That's
arts.
Jonathan. His cell phone's +1 310.
And I can give you the 10-second European way, which is pretty simple. You have three elements in a script. In a project, you have a script, you have a director, you have a cast. If these three elements are commercial, you can get any money from anywhere in the world, market money, subsidy, whatever. If you have two of these elements which are commercial and another one unknown, you can probably finance your film through a mixture of market money and subsidy money, soft money. Yep. If you have one element, you're going to be lucky if you have soft money, that's all. You're never going to get market money. If you have none of these elements, change project.
So they add on top of that, okay, so what happens is, like, when you go to these, there's markets, right? And so, for example, the three premier markets are the Berlin film market, EFM, it's known as the European film market, the Cannes market, and the American film market, which is in our backyard, and oh joy, I love that market, it's my backyard, so, that's where most of these pre-sales or these, global deals or international deals are happening because they're designed to have all the buyers in one space with all the sellers in one space. So traditionally in the last couple of years it's been the foreign sales market, which is these markets have been changing quite a bit because of disruption in the marketplace, right? And it's not been as active is probably the best word to say as in the years past. But the reality is, and this is like my perspective, it's getting more affordable to make films today because of technology. Because back then, like if you think about it, you would have to buy film.
I'm going to interrupt you right there, Mr. Agent.
Okay.
Hey, hang on one second.
And I think Matthew can also, I think all four of us can also agree to this. Films
Yeah.
will get more affordable when you take your actors and you bring their prices down. And you take the directors and you bring their prices down. And you take the scripts and the writers and you bring the prices down. Back to your speech.
I'm going to replay this part in YouTube, and I'm going to remember that when I negotiate with him on the next deal, right? No, but the reality is what I'm saying is the access to actually making content today is a lot easier for creators and producers because the cost of, a digital camera, like the technology advances in that part are making it, giving everyone opportunity to make content. And at the end of the day, my analysis of it is we need great content. right? And even though the business is changing, the best content still rises to the top. So if you have a great filmmaker, if you have a great certain amount of elements, it's about packaging the right thing to get a green lit, whether it be in the European market, whether it be in the American market, whether it be in this market, for example. It's all about being creative packagers and smart packagers to get content made.
And let's talk about that for a minute. We've been talking a bit about the business and the financing of movies. How important is the creative to get a movie financed? And what I mean by that is I mean scripts, director, talent. What does that impact have in making good movies, premium content movies? How important is that to each of you in getting your movies financed? And what do you find to be the most important element when you're looking at the script, the director, the actor, and that impact?
It's
Jonathan?
everything. You know, when we invite people to come see our movies, we're asking them for some money and their time. And money and time are people's two most valuable commodities. So in order to convince people to go spend an hour and a half or 2 hours watching a film, you know, you've got to really deliver the goods. And that starts with the script, and it goes into the director, and it goes into the cast. And if you're not at the highest level in each rung, your movie's not getting watched. This is, you know, become a very feast or famine business. The television is creating great content. Years ago, when you looked at actors or you would talk to an actor, they would want to do a big studio movie. Then they'd want to do a cool indie. Then down here was television. In today's world, big studio movie, great television, independent film. Just because, you know, the creative folks are making great television, they've got huge budgets to make it, and quite frankly, independent films are hard. Independent films are a labor of love for the most part. There are those of us who make films on that side that are also incredibly commercial, but there's no movie that an independent company can make that is over $40 million that a studio is not going to make for twice as much with bigger, better, louder, and stronger. So we've got to make smart stories that people want to see in a contained environment.
Bertrand, I want to ask you a question. You know, you've worked with some world-class filmmakers. And what's interesting is some of them do movies, some of them are looking at television. You know, there's a concept that's been going around and traveling around the world, I've been hearing over the last year, that the motion picture, the movie business is falling apart. And partly why is because when people go to the theater to see a movie and you fall in love with a character or you fall in love with a story, it's over in 2 hours. Yet when you go to television, when you go to series, you get to see them again next week. You get to see the same character that you fell in love with next week, the same story, and then the week after that. I think audiences are really enjoying that process of falling in love with characters and continually seeing that story, and whether you're binging or waiting till that next week and getting really excited, it's really hard to compete with that versus a movie where you watch it and it's over. And so you really have to have really premium content to stand out in the movie business. One of the things I've noticed in your career is you have worked with some of the greatest filmmakers. And I'm curious your point of view on your experience with them making movies. What is their interest now in terms of working in series and television? And overall, how does that affect you as a producer?
Okay, I think you're right. There's a competition which is much fiercer now, because it's not only competition for your time as an audience, but also their time, the time of directors, the time they're going to invest in their life in making films. So making a series which is financed by one partner, or and it's going to be shown all over the world, or making one independent movie financed by a number of independent partners and hopefully finding distribution. That's a gamble which is much more demanding now than it was before these big boys created their platforms. That said, I believe in competition, and I believe that the higher the stake, the higher the talent, and it forces us to move. The problem is when they've been really innovative, this platform, these HBOs and Netflix and Amazon, and probably much more than what we've been doing in cinema. One of my constant problems in cinema, when I pitch a project from one of our directors, I go and see people and say, oh, it's never been done before. That's exactly why we're excited. Most of the time I have in front of me someone saying, if it's never been done before, there must be a reason. So there is a kind of a constant fight between innovation and security. And cinema, you don't create, as you say, you don't create you create blockbusters, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. But when you do independent movie, it's a one-off. So if you fuck up, or if distribution is not there for your movie, your one-off is finished, and your original idea might end up being nowhere. So that's a problem.
And in hearing that for a moment, going to you, Mohammed, for a brief moment, you are a film activist and have a business called the Film Clinic, which is a hub for independent filmmakers. So you have so many filmmakers coming to your film clinic to be working, to be making movies. How has that impacted both their interest in film and television on your side, especially making movies, in the Arab world as well?
Well, I mean, yes, you do. I do get a lot of independent filmmakers who come with great ideas and sometimes really good projects. But running a business, like Peter said, you have to know more or less what is the value of a film. And I think that when you're dealing with an independent Arab film, it's really hard to establish that value. And sometimes you just have to make most of these decisions based on your passion for the material, for the director. And that's really, these are the two things that I tend to look at more than anything, more than cast. Especially if we're dealing with small budgets, then cast doesn't really become an issue. Back home, Egypt is a country that pretty much runs on a star system. So it's a bit like a small Bollywood when you really, stars command, foreign sales. I'm talking about foreign, meaning the Arab world, in terms of TV and theatrical distribution. But when the independent side, it's really just you just have to go based on your gut feeling, based on your passion for the material. And for television, it's different because for television, we rely on pre-sales. We don't go producing a TV series unless we pretty much have broadcasters, buyers that are lined up. So it's really just, for me, it's also been really good teaching me how to say no, because I used to not know how to say no at the beginning, and when I fall in love with a project or I feel like a director is really talented, and then you kind of realize that you have a certain capacity, and it's really important to be practical and know that you're not helping filmmakers by taking on more work than you normally should. So it's about chemistry. It's about your passion for the material, for the filmmakers, and then doing a really good job managing the process until the finished film. So
very cool. Yeah. Jonathan, you've been in foreign sales for a couple decades now, and I'm curious from your point of view. You're selling your movies to every country in the world. In every market and every ancillary. And I'm curious, just over the past 10 years and as of late, what's been the most dynamic paradigm shift for you in that, there's people around the world saying international sales are falling apart. That means the equity's got to come up with a lot more money. That makes it a big challenge. It puts a lot of pressure on the equity investors, because now they're putting up a lot more money than they're used to. So back in the day, if a movie sold, say 60, 70% sold in the international marketplace, now it could be 30, 40%, depending on the premium content level of the movie, of course. So taking an average blend, so that means the equity investor has to come up with a lot more money and hope that a salesperson is going to do a great job after the movie's finished. And so I'm curious what has happened mostly in your experience over the past, say 2 decades, but moreover of late, and how are you getting around that problem?
Sure. Well, it's a huge problem. It used to be that we would intentionally go into films and we wouldn't pre-sell everything. we would hold back a few territories or a portion of it for what we would call upside. And we knew that if the movie came out okay, there was a number, there was a floor in a given territory. And as Matthew said, we used to sell out every movie in every territory in every right. That's no longer the case in 2017. There are movies that go unsold in territories and major territories. Like the UK used to be a territory that was worth 8 to 10% of a film's budget. There were 3 movies that were budgeted over $40 million this year that sold in the UK for $100,000 or $200,000 each. So to give you an example, those movies, when they went to start making those movies, the salespeople, and thankfully none of those were ours, all good, smart people, estimated that they were going to get $2 to $3 million. So right there, you've got $6 million that's disappeared. So that's really the biggest challenge, is that a movie, just because a movie exists, it doesn't mean it has a value anymore in certain territories. Now that's for something that doesn't work. When a movie works in today's world, it still works at the highest levels, and it can still spin off the same amount of cash that it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. A hit is a hit, and it's always going to be a hit, and it's always going to make money, you know. And there were some major, major successes in the independent film space this year. Movies like La La Land that cost $25 million and grossed hundreds of million dollars worldwide. So there are definitely still the opportunities. It's just the middle has fallen out. And going back to what you said about films that people are only doing 30% in pre-sales or 30% in sales, quite frankly, those movies shouldn't be getting made. There's no economic reason for those films to get made in today's market. So there are always reasons that there are other reasons than economics that films get made. There are passion projects. There are rich guys who want to be in the business. There are producers who just don't quit and get lucky and through the sheer force of life and chutzpah get it done.
Sure will. And let's talk about that for a minute, because the panel's about money talks. And I'm really curious to ask everybody up here their quick answer on, is it money that talks, or is it the creative that really talks? Because I think there's a distinct difference between the two. And I'm curious from each of your different perspectives, as everybody's learned about what everyone does up here. What do you think is more important, the money and or the creative in getting content made?
I think the money sets the table and allows the creative to take over. Money is a weapon. And creative is knowing how to fight the battle.
Mohammed?
Honestly, I think it's both. I think, without the money, films won't get made, but I think that the creative elements are what seduce the money as well. So I think it's a combination of both. Coming from an independent background, I would like to say it's the creative that always wins, but that's not always the case. So, yeah.
Peter?
I would lean more towards the creative, because I think behind the creative is like when great content gets made, but you need money to have global film, independent film get made, so it's a combination of both. But, the reality is with great creatives and great packaging behind product, that's when you see great movies work, and then, that's demonstrated by the consumers or the patrons watching it, and you seeing it execute all these global numbers.
Over time, I've discovered there are 2 types of movies. Some I'm doing very occasionally, which are movies driven by your market. If the problem is not what they cost, but what they're going to make. And these are like, I did a movie with Kate Winslet and, Alan Rickman, and you kind of know already the kind of figures. So the cost has to adapt to that. But most of the movies I'm making as a European, mainly art house filmmaker, producer, is really what it costs, because you really don't know what it's going to make. And sometimes it's going to be making very poor figures, but sometimes like a movie for 45 years, which costs 2 million and grows 25 internationally, the result is extremely good. But if I had wondered from the start from a market perspective only, I would not have made 45 years. Because the story of a couple after 40 years of marriage, and who cares?
Well,
Yeah,
let me
well,
just amend what I had said before. We make two kinds of movies at our company. We make Navy SEALs versus zombies, so we can pay for Dallas Buyers Club.
So there you go. Well, let's take a moment and start the Q&A. It's about time, so let's take some questions. We got a microphone coming for you.
Just shout.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone. Thank you, Peter, for the crash course on how movies are made, and thank you, Mr. Bertrand, for your framework. I'm a scriptwriter from Saudi Arabia, and I wanted to ask Mr. Mohammed, you spoke earlier that you work with writers, you train them, so I'm very interested when you mentioned that point, and how do I get to you, basically. What is the training that you offer, and as a scriptwriter, what can you offer me, and what can I offer you? And then I have one other question for everyone, which is, do you think that there's financially, there's a formula for, a successful movie, or does it happen that, a movie that, could just do it by luck?
Yeah, of course there's a formula. We could talk after. I'll give it to you. It's going to take 2 minutes. It's very easy. No, I'm kidding. There's no formula for making success. No, but to answer your first question, yeah, I mean, I used to do, and I still do, I used to do a lot of, training workshops, etc. And when I started in Egypt, I saw a real need for that. And so I was, I brought people like Sid Field to Egypt, to do workshops and seminars and other experts. Also did a lot of that myself, was teaching and helping writers to also network and help each other. So I don't do it on a full-time basis. It's something that I do around the Arab world sometimes. This year I've done it in Jordan, other countries, and last year in yeah, I mean, I've done a couple in Egypt recently. So Saudi Arabia is a country that is really opening up to cinema, and I think that's something we're all excited about. And I've already actually been approached by people over there to try to set up some kind of training programs in Saudi Arabia for writers, directors, etc. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would also like to mention is that I'm a founding member of something called the Arab Film Institute, which just launched last year and the end of last year, and that is one of the things we do, is we offer these types of programs. We did 2 workshops in Egypt last year. With one was an alternative distribution and creative production workshop with Nicholas Gonda, who produced Terrence Malick, and also some other other workshops around the Arab world. So look it up. I mean, this could be something that maybe by being a member, this could be something that you could access some of these workshops and training. So there are opportunities. I would like to see more. Unfortunately, there's not enough. So I hope that even here in this country, that you'll be able to find opportunities for that.
As far as a formula goes, I think everyone will agree. I don't think there necessarily is a formula. Every movie gets made so differently. I think at the end of the day, just speaking out, that I find that the filmmaker to be one of the most valuable things in making a movie. I think a filmmaker make a bad script great. I think a filmmaker is most often going to attract the talent. I find that as a producer, no matter what you do and what your impact is, there's always, between action and cut, there's an energy in the mise en scene of a movie in which a filmmaker can impact in their energy that I haven't found other elements of a production to impact as much as a filmmaker. Curious what you all think as well.
The formula that we try to employ is, if you can do it for $5, do it for $4. Spend less, be smart, be economic in your thinking and the way you do things, because spending more doesn't make it more valuable.
I would quote Hitchcock, who said, "I don't know the formula for success, but I know the formula for failure, which is to try and please everybody. So be distinctive." That's all.
I was just gonna, so I gave you the blueprint on how films get made, right? But the last thing that like doesn't get checked off on that equation, and this may be a little cheesy, but I totally believe in this, is, you know, the difference between a good film or a decent film to a great film is passion. So you gotta make sure whoever's involved in the specific film or the TV property is passionate about it. And it starts with the, you know, whether it be the producers, the filmmaker, the writers, the actors, you know, like if they're all engaged, you're gonna just make this great environment, and you're gonna see a great, you know, piece of content come out.
Terrific, terrific. And there's a question over here, please.
Just wanted to ask, why is the foreign market falling? You said that you're losing the foreign market, or it's weaker, or it's.
It is. There's a number of reasons. You know, when you're dealing in a world economy, you're dealing with currency issues, which that's part of it. But more than anything, what I'm seeing is local productions in each country have been growing each year on year. You know, guys like Mohammed are making great movies here, so that when I go to sell a movie to my Middle Eastern distributor, he says, "What do I want to buy your movie for when I can take his? It's local. I'm going to do better with his, and it's going to be cheaper than your big goofy Hollywood movie." You know, multiply that times 40 countries around the world. Add in the local production incentives like you have in Bertrand's part of the world with Europe, and you know, it's challenging for American independent cinema to find its place.
That the movies have lost a certain caliber, quality, and they're not as good as they used to be?
I think more than anything, the competition for the time of the audience is much larger. So we're not. Some years ago, you were going to cinemas, maybe to theater, but now you've got games, you've got SVOD, you've got a number of activities, you've got application on your iPhone. So you have so many occasions to spend your time in different ways than going to the movies, that the movies have to be really, really good to make you take your car and go and pay $10 to see them. So I think that's part of the equation. And also in terms of the value, why the sales have diminished, is that the most of the value backing acquisition internationally relied on pay TV, and it's a sense of history. They are diminishing because now the people subscribe to Netflix or to Amazon more than to pay TV, and these Netflix and Amazon are more interested in making original films than buying yours.
Another question?
Hi, everybody. I'm just asking, like, you're talking about foreign market, like, from the U.S. or Europe perspective to our countries, like the Middle East. But more curious about the other way around, like when we're talking about Middle Eastern countries making movies, and it's the ratio, like the gap between we watching American and European movies versus Europe and America watching Middle Eastern movies. There's a huge gap. Like, why you don't like invest in like buying Middle Eastern movies and distribute it in the U.S. or America, especially like with the currency rate, like, you know, as Mohammed was saying, like $100,000, which compared to the American movie, you can make like 10 Egyptian movies with like a fraction of what you do with one American movie. So it's very cheap to make it, but we don't see that happen. So.
You've seen some global Netflix deals come out of the Middle East. My friends at Front Row Entertainment made a couple of those deals last year for movies that come from the region. And I guess the answer to that is there hasn't been that breakout movie that has captured a world audience where people said, we really need to pay attention to this director that comes from Egypt or comes from Saudi Arabia. There just hasn't been the inciting incident or the inciting movie.
Hi. First of all, great talk. It was really, really interesting. My question is, what's your advice to new private equity funders who are interested in getting into the film game? So people who have sort of some cash they want to invest in films in America, basically, I think for prestige and also for, you know, sort of getting the fingers wet in the business.
Well, I think one of the key efforts in that area is it's who's the producer, and what's their experience, how much experience do they have? Have they done all of the homework before you agree to invest in a movie? Have they done budgets and schedules? Have they shown you a financial model? You know, I think when people approach, you know, me with a film and say, hey, would you like to invest in this? You know, the one question that I am always asking myself is, how much money am I going to lose? And is it worth that for this movie? And therein lies the creative and financial balance. And I find at the end of the day, as a financier, the one place where I'm going to get my answers and going to be able to ask all the right questions is to the producer. And some producers are creative, and some producers are financial, and some producers have both. At the end of the day, I think any financier really can go, wow, I love the director, I love this script, I love this story. But without a really strong producer, I think a financier is lost. And I think that that's one of the most important places. And if you love a project, you can go find a financier that's really talented at what they do to be your eyes and ears, to oversee the project, if there isn't one on there. And so that's where I find the strength for financiers dealing with producers.
That's a big part of it, but the other thing to do is put the right team around you, one. Two, stay away from Cannes, stay away from the glamour, stay away from the parties, and do your homework. Do your homework, ask every question. There's no such thing as a bad question. You know, producers and sales companies are always looking for new financiers to do business with. None of us want to do one movie with one person one time, because that's, you know, it takes such a process to get to know somebody and get a deal done that you want to be able to replicate and replicate and replicate. So, and call someone like Peter to be your advisor.
I'm guessing he's a financier, everyone in the audience.
All right, another question? Yes, sir.
Hi. So far we've been talking about traditional media, movies, TV content, but could I get the panel to talk a little bit about emerging technology, specifically immersive entertainment, and the opportunities you see in the next 3 to 5 years?
When you mean immersive, you're talking about like VR, AR?
VR, AR, mixed reality.
You know, it's funny, I think a lot of the conversations become down to whether you think the future is VR or AR, by way of example, right? Me personally, I think it's AR. I think VR, you know, sort of feels in some respects like the 8-track tape or Laserdisc, you know? But I think it's an amazing launching pad to where technology is going in the future. You know, there's a movie I'm involved in right now where the filmmaker is on set and shooting VR during the production and looking to make something out of it for when it's gone, when the movie's over and the movie comes out. So I look at it from my point of view as a producer as really supplemental bonus materials, things like that at this point. You know, things that can go out there and help market the movie itself is how I've been looking at the digital business or immersive business.
I was just going to add, for example, specific to VR, I think there are specific sectors of the business that are going to be very active in that arena. And so, for example, if you look at education, I think VR and AR are going to change education quite a bit, right? So when you're a kid in 3rd grade, you know, reading social studies, and let's say you hate history, and your teacher says, hey, you know, we're going to go back to this battle in 1858, and you're like, no, not the battle, you know, this is so boring. And then, like, you're like, so put on your VR glasses and let's go back there and watch it happen. That's amazing, and it's going to change education. So, or whether it be in medicine, you know, where, you know, doctors are analyzing how molecules react. If they can see it from a VR perspective, that's going to change the medical field. So I think it's going to be a little bit of time in entertainment. I think it's more supplemental stuff, like Matthew was saying, but there is going to be, as it advances more and more and more, there's gonna be ways consumers watch entertainment on it even further. But I just think right now, because it's such an active marketplace and so much money is pumping into there, there needs to be this breakout so that people can see, oh, that VR film or that VR episodic worked really, really well. And it hasn't. I mean, to my knowledge, it really hasn't happened.
No, I think you know, the way it's trending right now, at best it is going to be a corollary piece of business or augment, but I don't think there's ever going to be virtual reality movie theaters, and I could be wrong.
Well, we don't have any more time for questions. I want to thank the Dubai International Film Festival. I'd love to thank the panelists for Jonathan and Mohammed and Peter and Bertrand. Thank you for your time. This has really been a great experience with everybody. Thank you all for coming.
Lars,
Appreciate it.